A combination lock uses a 3-digit code. Each digit can be any of the 10 available integers 0 through 9. How many different combinations are possible? In this probability problem, there are 3 independent events. Independent meaning they don't affect each other. So to find the possible outcomes, we would have to find the product of the possible outcomes for these 3 independent events. So the possible outcomes would be first the possible outcomes for the first digit, 10, since there are 10 available numbers, times the possible outcomes for the second digit, which again is 10 integers, times the possible outcomes for the third digit, which is again 10. So the probability is 10, or the possible outcomes is 10 times 10, which is 100, times 10, which is 1,000 possible outcomes. This is the quicker way to do it. Of course, you can always see by actually writing the combinations. 0, 0, 0 would be the first. Then 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 2, 0, 0, 3, 0, 0, 4, 5, 6, etc., all the way up to 999, which makes it seem like there are 999 possible outcomes. But really, we have to count this first one, the 0, 0, 0, which gives us the total of 1,000 possible outcomes. Elijah drove 45 miles to his job in an hour and 10 minutes in the morning. On the way home, however, traffic was much heavier, and the same trip took an hour and a half. What was his average speed in miles per hour for the round trip? So first, let's determine just how far Elijah went. It was 45 miles to his job, and then he had to drive 45 miles back home. So he drove that 45 miles twice, or 90 miles. Speed is calculated by dividing your distance by your time. So we've got his total distance. Now we need to find his total time. It says it took him an hour and 10 minutes to get to his job. So 1 hour and 10 minutes is a total of 60 minutes plus 10 minutes, 70 minutes. Then on the way home, it took him an hour and a half. So 1 hour, 30 minutes. Again, an hour, 60 minutes plus 30 minutes means a total of 90 minutes. And I'm converting the time into minutes just because it makes those units easier to work with. When you've got hours and minutes together, it's easier just to bring them all into minutes, put them all in that same unit of minutes. So 70 plus 90 is 160 minutes for his total travel time. So again, to calculate his speed, we need to divide his total distance by his total time. So 90 miles divided by 160 minutes. Well, the first thing I could do to simplify this is I could cancel a 0. So now it's just 9 divided by 16, which will be a lot easier to work with. So I have 9 divided by 16. 16 doesn't go into 9 at all. That's 0, which means I'm going to need to add a decimal and a 0. 16 goes into 90 5 times. So 16 times 5. 5 times 6 is 30. Carry the 3. 5 times 1 is 5 plus 3 is 8. So that's 80. We subtract and we get 10. So we need to add another 0 and bring it down. So 16 goes into 100 6 times. Since it went into 16 times 5 was 80, then one more time would be 96. And then we subtract and we get 4. Add another 0, bring it down. 16 goes into 40 2 times. 16 times 2 is 32. So we subtract and we get 8. Add another 0, bring it down. And 16 goes into 80 5 times. 16 times 5 is 80. We subtract and get 0. So that means that his speed in miles per minute would be 0.5625. But they didn't ask us for his speed in miles per minute. They asked us for his average speed in miles per hour. So now I have to convert this speed into miles per hour by multiplying it by 60, since there are 60 minutes in 1 hour. So if he travels this speed every minute, then we multiply by 60 to find the speed in miles per hour. So first start with your 0 placeholder. 6 times 5 is 30, so that's 0, carry the 3. 6 times 2 is 12, plus 3 is 15. 6 times, put that in the wrong place, oops. 6 times 6 is 36, plus 1 is 7, carry the 3. 6 times 5 is 30, plus 3 is 33. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers behind the decimal. So your answer should have 4 numbers behind the decimal. So it's 33 and 75/100 miles per hour, which is the same as 33 and 3/4 miles per hour, since 3/4 and 75/100 are equal. The expressions y equals negative 3x plus 6 and y equals 2x minus 4 represent straight lines. Compute the coordinates of the point at which they intersect. This can be done by substituting 2x minus 4 for y in our other expression, or by substituting negative 3x plus 6 for y in this expression. Either way, the result is 2x minus 4 equals negative 3x plus 6. Now we need to solve for x. First, I'll add 3x to both sides so that I can get all my x variables on one side of the equation. 2x plus 3x is 5x minus 4 equals negative 3x plus 3x cancels, and I'm left with 6 on the right side. Now we need to add 4 to both sides. Bring down the 5x. Negative 4 plus 4 is 0 equals 10. And finally, we need to divide both sides by 5 to solve for x. 5 divided by 5 is 1, times x is x, and that equals 10 divided by 5, which is 2. We're halfway there now. We've found what x is. To find y, we need to substitute 2 for x in either one of these expressions. And I'm going to use the second one. Since x is 2, we need to replace x with 2 to find y. So y equals 2 times 2 minus 4. Y equals 2 times 2 is 4, minus 4. So y equals 0. Our ordered pair is 2, 0. And you can always check this by plugging this ordered pair back into both of your expressions, and you should get a true mathematical equation there when you do that. And if you didn't, then you know that you made an error somewhere in your work. Which of the following expressions is equivalent to the quantity a plus b times the quantity a minus b? Well, this is actually a rule that you would memorize, but you don't have to memorize it. You can always just take these binomials and multiply them together using FOIL. The F stands for first, meaning to multiply the first terms in each set of parentheses. So A times A. And A times A is A squared. Then O stands for outer or outside. So you multiply the two terms on the outsides, or A and negative B. So A times negative B is negative AB. I stands for inner or inside. So you multiply the two terms on the inside, B and A. B times A is BA or AB, so plus AB. And finally, the L stands for last. So you multiply the two terms that are in the last positions of each set of parentheses. Positive B times negative B, which is negative B squared. Then to simplify, we combine like terms. Negative AB and positive AB are like terms, and they cancel each other out because they're additive inverses of each other, or opposites. So we're left with A squared minus B squared, or answer A. Triangle ABC is a right triangle, and angle ACB is 30 degrees. What is the measure of angle BAC? Well, the first thing I want to do is fill in this information, that angle ACB is 30. ACB is this angle right here, and it's 30 degrees. So I know 2 out of the 3 angles of my triangle. And I know that the 3 angles of a triangle add to be 180. So that means that this 90-degree angle plus this 30-degree angle plus the measure of angle BAC right here equals 180. The first thing I need to do is combine like terms. 90 plus 30 is 120, plus the measure of angle BAC is 180 degrees. To solve for the measure of angle BAC, we need to subtract 120 from both sides. 120 minus 120 is 0. Bring down the measure of angle BAC equals 180 minus 120 is 60. So that means the measure of angle BAC is 60 degrees. Mark is driving to Phoenix from a city located 210 miles north. He drives the first 10 miles in 12 minutes. If he continues at the same rate, how long will it take him to reach his destination? We can use a proportion to solve this problem. We know that the first 10 miles took him 12 minutes. So that's one ratio. 10 miles took 12 minutes. What we want to know is how long it took him to drive the 210 miles. And since it's at the same rate, he continues in the same rate, we can use this proportion to solve and find how long it's going to take him in minutes. Miles to minutes, miles to minutes. And to solve a proportion, we cross multiply. So 10 times x is 10x equals 12 times 210. So I'm going to multiply that right over here. 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 0 placeholder. 1 times 0 is 0. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 2 is 2. And we add these together. 0, 2, 5, 2. So 2,520. And then to solve for x, we need to divide both sides by 10. So x equals, you can just cancel a 0 here, 252. 252 what? Well, 252 minutes. But as you can see, our answers aren't in minutes. They're in hours and minutes. So we need to figure out just how many hours and then leftover minutes there are in 252 minutes. And since there are 60 minutes in 1 hour, I need to divide 252 by 60. So 252 divided by 60. So 60 does not go into 25. 60 goes into 252. 60, 120, 180, 240. So 4 times, because 4 times 6 is 24, and 4 times 60 is 240. We subtract, and we get 12 that's left over. So that means 252 minutes is 4 hours and 12 minutes left over. So that is answer choice B, 4 hours and 12 minutes. In an election in Kimball County, candidate A obtained 36,800 votes. His opponent, candidate B, obtained 32,100 votes. 2,100 votes went to write-in candidates. What percentage of the votes went to candidate A? To find a percent, we need the part over the whole. And we know the part. The part is the number of votes candidate A received, which is 36,800. What I need to know is the whole, or the total number of votes. To find the total number of votes, we need to add up 36,800, 32,100, and 2,100, so that we can find the total. So we're adding, those are 0, and again we get 0. Then we have 8, 9, 10, so that's a 0, carry the 1. We have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, carry the 1. And we have 3, 6, 7. So that means there were a total of 71,000 votes. Now to find our percent, we need to divide. That'll give us our decimal, which will then change into a percent. But before I divide, I'm going to first simplify this fraction by canceling 2 zeros. And now my division will be a lot easier. So we need to divide 368 by 710. Well, 710 doesn't go into 368 at all, which means I'm going to have to add a decimal and a 0. And now I can divide 710 into 3,680. So I can use compatible numbers here, and 710 is very close to 700. 700 times 5 would be 3,500. So I'm thinking 710 is going to go about 5 times into 3,680. So let me multiply this. We get 0, and that's 5, and that's 35. So 3,550. Yep, looks good. So that's 5. We have 3,550. Now we need to subtract, and that's 0, 3, 1, so 130. Then we need to add a 0 and bring it down. 1,300. So 710, and it's only going to go into 1,300 one time because 700 plus 700 would be 1,400, and that's too much. So it's just one time. 710 times 1 is 710. Then we need to subtract. So I'm going to borrow from the 1, that's a 0, that's 13. Borrow from the 13, that's 12, which makes that 10. And we'll borrow, well, we don't need to borrow, that's 0. So 10 minus 1 is 9. And 12 minus 7 is 5, 590, which makes sense. If you add 90 back to 710, you get 800. And if you add 500 to 800, you get the 1,300. So we need to add another 0 and bring it down. So now we need to know how many times 710 goes into 5,900. So I'm again going to use that compatible number of 700. So let's see, 700 times 8 would be 5,600. So I'm thinking it goes in there about 8 times. So that's 0, and that's 8, and that's 56. So yes, that's very close. So that's 8. And we have 5,680. We can subtract, and that's 0. Borrow from the 9, that's an 8, so that's 10. 10 minus 8 is 2. 8 minus 6 is 2, so we get 220. And we could keep going, but really, that's all I need to know, because as I look at my answers, it's very clear which one of these is my answer. This is, well, it's about 518 thousandths, and then when we change it into our percent, we move our decimal 2 places to the right, we get 51 8/10%, which is answer A. Raphael has a business selling computers. He buys computers from the manufacturer for $450 each and sells them for $800. Each month, he must also pay fixed costs of $3,000 for rent and utilities at his store. If he sells N computers in a month, which of the following equations can be used to calculate his profit? Profit. Profit is found by subtracting the money you spend from the money you earn. So we know that he earns $800 for each computer that he sells. That's money he earns, $800 for each computer, which means to multiply times the number of computers he sells. And that's all the money he makes. So everything else is money he spends. So from the money he earns, we need to subtract $450 for each computer, because that's how much he has to pay the manufacturer. So minus 450 in. And we also have to subtract $3,000 flat. So just $3,000. Now if we compare what we have to these equations, we know we can already eliminate A. It doesn't even take the 3,000 into account, so A is out. On B, if we distributed this in, we'd be subtracting 3,000 in, which is not right. We're not losing $3,000 for every computer we sell, so B is out. On C, it has us multiplying 3,000 times in, which would be great. He'd be making tons of money, but that's not this situation. In D, when we distribute the in, the number of computers, n times 800, 800 in, minus n times 450, so minus 450 in, and then minus 3,000. So D's looking pretty good. The problem with E is, instead of subtracting the 3,000 he spends on rent and utilities, they're adding it back in like that's more money he's making. But he's not making that money, he's losing that money. So D would be the correct answer choice. In the figure, A, B, and C are points on the number line, where O is the origin. What is the ratio of the distance BC to the distance AB? So first we need to find the distance between points B and C. And the distance between 2 points is the absolute value of the difference of the coordinates. So that is the absolute value of B is 5 minus C is 8, which is the absolute value of -3, and that is 3. So the distance between points B and C is 3. Now we're going to do the same thing to find the distance between points A and B. And again, it's the absolute value of the difference of the coordinates of point A and point B. So that's the absolute value of A is -6 minus B is 5, which is the absolute value of -6 minus 5 is -11, and that is 11. So the distance from point A to point B is 11. Now they've asked us what the ratio of those distances is. And it gives you the order that it wants the ratio written in. So the distance BC should be the first number in the ratio, 3, 2, and we use a colon, or you can write 2, is fine too. The distance from points A to B, which is 11. So our ratio is 3 to 11, or answer D. The diagram shows the outline of a racetrack for skaters, which consists of 2 long straight sections and 2 semicircular turns. Given the dimensions shown, which of the following most closely measures the perimeter of the entire track? Well, they've given us that this length here is 150 yards, apparently, since all of our answers are in yards. So that means that this opposite straight side here would also be 150 yards. And actually, just from that amount of information, we can already start eliminating some answers. I know that 180 yards is definitely not enough because I've got 150 and 150. So we're going to have to skate this 150, skate some more, skate another 150, and skate some more. So we know we're already over 180 yards. We also know it's going to be more than 300 yards because just the two straight sections are 300 yards. So we can already eliminate that answer choice. And we're down to these three possibilities. So that means we need to figure out what this distance is here and here. They told us that these were semicircular turns. That means that semi means half of a circle. So if you take these two halves of a circle and you put them together, you get one whole circle. So really they're traveling the distance of one whole circle in addition to these straight sides here, which means we need to find the circumference of our circle to find the distance around the circle. That's what circumference is. And the circumference of a circle is pi times the diameter of the circle, which they gave us. They told us that this distance is 30. Well, that goes all the way across my circle. So that's my diameter. So my circumference is 30 pi. And pi is about 3. It's actually a little over 3. But since they said most closely measures, we'd probably be okay just using 3 for pi. So our circumference is about 90 yards. Plus, we have these straight sides. So the total distance around the racetrack would be the 150 yards plus 150 yards for our two straight sides, plus the about 90 for these two curved sides, the semicircular, which is 390 yards. Now, if you'll remember, we rounded pi down. It's actually over 3. We rounded it down to 3. So really our answer is a little bit higher than 390, which is answer choice D, 395 yards. Which of the following expressions represents the ratio of the area of a circle to its circumference? We've got some pretty key words here. The first one I see is ratio. A ratio is a comparison of two numbers, like a fraction. And what we're comparing is the area of a circle to its circumference. Well, the area of a circle is pi times radius squared, while the circumference of a circle is 2 times pi times radius. So the area is going to be our numerator. Since it was listed first, area to circumference means that the area should be in the numerator divided by, this 2 is your division bar, the circumference, 2 times pi times radius. And then we need to simplify. First I see that pi divided by pi cancels. Pi divided by pi is 1. Anything divided by itself is 1. So we can cancel it. And then I can simplify r squared divided by r. When you divide, you subtract the exponents. Or another way to think about it is r squared is r times r. And I'm dividing that by r. So again, you have something divided by itself is 1, or it cancels. So I'm left with just r in the numerator divided by 2 in the denominator, since those r's canceled. So we just have r divided by 2, which is answer E. Pradeep decides to invest $4,500 in Cisco Systems stock and buys it at the price shown in the table. At what price should he sell it to obtain a profit of 10%? So he's buying Cisco Systems stock at $3.50 per share. If he wants to make a profit of 10%, then he needs to sell his stock when the price per share is 10% higher. And there are several ways to solve this problem. I'll show you one. So first I want to know, what is 10% of $3.50? Well, of means to multiply. So I'm multiplying times 1/10 or times 10 hundredths. And multiplying times 10 hundredths means just moving that decimal one place to the left. So that is 35 hundredths or 35 cents. So that means that his stock needs to be 35 cents higher. The price per share needs to be 35 cents greater. So $3.50 plus 35 cents is $3.85. So in order to make a profit, a 10% profit, then he needs to sell his stock at $3.85 per share. Find the length of the side labeled X. The triangle represented in the figure is a right triangle, as shown. To find the missing side of any right triangle, we can use the Pythagorean theorem, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where the a and the b are the legs of the right triangle, or the two sides that form the right angle in the right triangle. And C is the hypotenuse of the right triangle, or the side that's across from the right angle. So now we need to substitute the values from our triangle to the Pythagorean theorem. Your A could either be 15 or X, because both of those are legs. So I'm going to use 15. 15 squared plus, and I can replace a B with X. X squared equals, C again is the hypotenuse, which is 25 squared. Now we need to simplify by squaring 15 and 25. 15 squared means 15 times 15, which is 225, plus x squared is equal to 25 squared, which is 25 times 25, or 625. Now we're trying to find what x is, which means we need to get x alone. To do that, the first thing we need to do is subtract 225 from both sides. 225 minus 225 is 0. Bring down the x squared term, bring down the equal sign, and 625 minus 225 is 400. And we're almost done. Again, we're trying to find x, not x squared. So in order to solve for x, we need to do the opposite of squaring x. The opposite of squaring x is square rooting x. So we must square root both sides to solve for x. The square root of x squared is simply x, equals the square root of 400 is 20, since 20 times 20 is 400. And when you square root a number, you're really asking a question. And the question is, what number times itself is 400? That answer is 20. So our answer is B. A tire on a car rotates 500 RPM, or revolutions per minute, when the car is traveling at 50 kilometers per hour. What is the circumference of the tire in meters? Well, the first thing I want to do is take this 50 kilometers per hour and convert it into meters, since that's what they want the circumference in. So to convert kilometers to meters, I multiply it by the conversion factor of 1,000 meters is 1 kilometer. And when I multiply these fractions, I can cross-cancel these units, kilometers, and I'll be left with meters per hour. And I'll go ahead and do that first. So our kilometers cross-cancel. 50 times 1,000 is 50,000 meters per 1 hour. So every hour, this car goes 50,000 meters. And we know that it goes 500 revolutions every minute. So then I want to convert my 50,000 meters per hour into meters per minute so I can more easily compare it to my revolutions per minute. So I'll multiply it by the conversion factor of 1 hour is 60 minutes. So again, my hours cross cancel since I'm multiplying fractions, and I get 50,000 meters every 60 minutes. What I want to find, though, is what 1 revolution is. How many meters is 1 revolution? Because 1 revolution is 1 time all the way around the tire. And that would be the circumference, which is what they're asking me for. So I'm going to take this 50,000 meters per 60 minutes and multiply it times my 500 revolutions per minute. So every 1 minute, the car goes 500 revolutions. So that again, my minutes, these units, minutes cross cancel. And I can cross cancel my 50,000 and my 500 by dividing them both by 500. And 500 divided by 500 is 1. And 50,000 divided by 500 is 100. So then 100 meters times 1 is 100 meters divided by 60 revolutions. So now I found that every 100 meters, this car, it's going 60 revolutions every 100 meters, which I can then simplify by canceling out the zeros, and I get 10/6 meters per revolution. So it goes 10/6 of a meter every revolution. And again, a revolution is 1 time all the way around the wheel, which is the circumference. So our circumference is 10/6. Determine the midpoint of the line shown in the figure. We will use the midpoint formula to find the midpoint of this line. The midpoint formula is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and then y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So what you're doing is you're adding your two x coordinates together from the two endpoints and dividing that sum by 2, basically finding the average of the x values, which would be the middle of the x values, and then doing the same with your y coordinates of your two endpoints. You'll add those together and then divide that sum by 2. Again, finding the average of those y coordinates, or the middle of the y coordinates. So when you find the middle x coordinate and the middle y coordinate, you'll then have the coordinates of the midpoint. But first we need to know the coordinates of our endpoints. So this endpoint is at negative 1, 2, 3, 4, positive 1, 2, 3, 4. So these coordinates are negative 4, 4 for this endpoint. And this endpoint is at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, negative 2. These are my x1, y1, x2, y2 coordinates. And it doesn't matter which one you label as your x1, y1, as long as you label them consistently. For instance, this could not be my x2, y1. Since this is my x2 coordinate, that means this is my y2 coordinate. And those subscripts, the 1s and the 2s, all that means is this is the first point, this is the second point. But it really doesn't matter which point is your first and which point is your second. So I just usually label them from left to right. And now all we need to do is substitute and solve. So the midpoint is x1 plus x2, so negative 4 plus 6 divided by 2. And then y1 plus y2, 4 plus negative 2 divided by 2. Now we need to simplify by adding. Negative 4 plus 6 is 2 divided by 2. 4 plus negative 2 is 2 divided by 2. And finally we divide. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So the midpoint is 1, 1, which you can see on this graph, over 1, up 1. And you know that point does look like it's right in the middle of that line. So that's our midpoint. Morris started work today at 7 a.m. and worked until 4:30 p.m. He earns $12 per hour for his regular shift, which is 8 hours, and 50% more per hour for overtime. How much did Morris make today? The first thing we want to do is find out how long Morris worked. So if he worked from 7 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., then from 7 a.m. to noon, that's 5 hours. And from noon to 4:30 p.m. is 4.5 hours, which means he made he worked for a total of 9.5 hours. Now they told us that he makes $12 an hour for just his regular 8-hour shift. So for 8 of these hours, he made $12 an hour. And the rest, the leftover, so 1.5 hours, would be his overtime. And for overtime, he makes 50% more per hour. So his regular pay would be 8 hours times $12 an hour, which is $96. But then for overtime, he makes 1.5 times as much as he made for his regular shift. So 12 times 50% more, which would be 1.5, times he worked that for 1.5 hours. So first I'm going to multiply 12 times 1.5. 5 times 2 is 10, carry the 1. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. Put a 0 placeholder. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. So we add this together and we get 180, but there's one number behind the decimal. So that means that he was making $18 an hour for that 1.5 hours that he worked overtime. So now we multiply 18 times 1.5. And 5 times 8 is 40. Carry the 4. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 4 is 9. 0 placeholder. 1 times 8 is 8. 1 times 1 is 1. We add those together. 17, carry the 1. One number behind the decimal. One number behind the decimal. So that means he made $27 in overtime. So his total amount that he made that day would be the sum of the amount of money he made for his regular shift and the amount he made for overtime. So we need to add $96 and $27. 7 plus 6 is 13. Carry the 1. 9, 10, 11, 12. So that means he made $123 that day. An airplane leaves Atlanta at 2 p.m. and flies north at 250 miles per hour. A second airplane leaves Atlanta 30 minutes later and flies north at 280 miles per hour. At what time will the second airplane overtake the first? Well, this is a DIRT problem, or distance equals rate times time. You see, we've got time, 30 minutes later. We've got rate, 280 miles per hour, 250 miles per hour. We've got distance here because both these planes are flying a distance, and that's how their rate and time are related. So we need to use this formula to help us organize our data. So first, let's find the distance for the first airplane. The rate of the first airplane is 250 miles per hour. So 250 times, and then all we know is what time the first airplane left. We don't know how long that airplane flew. So we've got to use T for time there. Now the distance for the second airplane, the rate is 280 miles per hour. And we do know a little bit about the time that the second airplane flew. If you'll notice, the second airplane is going faster than the first one. So if they left from the same place and they go in the same direction, they're both going north, then the second airplane is eventually going to catch up with the first and actually pass the first. And that's what we're trying to figure out, is at what time will the second airplane catch up to or overtake the first. So the second airplane won't have been flying as long as the first airplane when it catches up. It's going faster, and it left 30 minutes later. So however long this first airplane has been flying, the second one will have been flying that time minus 30 minutes, since it left 30 minutes later. Now if you think about this, you've got two planes leaving from Atlanta. They're both flying north. And the question is, when will the second one overtake the first one? Well, this is what we're trying to find out, is what time that will happen. Well, at that time, both of these airplanes will have flown the exact same distance. We don't know what that distance is, but we know that it's the same. So we can take these two distances and we can set them equal. So the distance of plane 1, 250t, is equal to the distance of plane 2, 280 times the quantity, t minus 30. And now we need to solve for t. So the first thing we want to do is distribute our 280. So I'm going to bring down this 250t equals 280 times t, 280t, minus 280 times 30. 280 times 30, 0 placeholder, 3 times 0 is 0, 3 times 8 is 24, 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. That's 8,400. Now we need to get all of our variables on the same side of the equation. We don't want to have t on the left side and t on the right side. So I'm going to subtract 280t from both sides. 250t minus 280t. I'm taking away more than I have, so I'm going to end up with a negative. And the difference between 280t and 250t is 30t. So negative 30t equals, and by subtracting this 280t, I've actually canceled that term on the right side. And I'm left with negative 8,400. To solve for t, then, we need to divide both sides by negative 30. Negative 30 divided by negative 30 is 1, times t is simply t. Negative 8,400 divided by negative 30. First of all, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Then we can cancel a 0. And really all we have to do is divide 840 by 3. Really, I'm running out of space here. I'm going to get rid of this so we can divide 840 by 3. 3 goes into 8 2 times. That's 6. Subtract and you get 2. Bring down the 4. 3 goes into 24. 8 times. 3 times 8 is 24. Subtract and you get 0. Bring down your 0. 3 goes into 0 0 times. So it's 280. But 280 what? Well, if you'll recall, we did t minus 30 minutes. So that would mean that these t's are in minutes. So we just found how many minutes the first plane, t, the first plane would have been flying when the second plane overtook it. So we need to first convert these minutes into hours and minutes so that we can then find the time, what time it was when that happened. So to convert these minutes into hours, there are 60 minutes in 1 hour, which means we need to divide 280 by 60. So we've got 60, 120, 180, 240. So 60 goes into 280 4 times and you get 240. You subtract and you get a remainder of 40 minutes. So that's 4 hours, 40 minutes. So 4 hours, 40 minutes after the first plane left at 2 p.m. is when the second plane overtook it or caught up with it or had traveled the same distance. So 2 plus 4 hours is 6 and 40 minutes. So at 6:40 is when p.m. is when that second plane overtook the first. Answer C. Arrange the following numbers in order from least to greatest. 2 cubed, 4 squared, 6 to the 0 power, 9, and 10 to the first. The first thing we need to do is simplify these numbers. 2 cubed means 2 times itself 3 times. So that's 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. So that is 8. 4 squared is 4 times itself 2 times. 4 times 4 is 16. Now this next one is very interesting because it doesn't matter what this number is. The base number doesn't matter. Any number raised to the 0 power is always 1. 9, of course, is simply 9. And 10 to the first is 10 times itself, 1 time. Or not really 10 times itself at all, it's just 10. You're not multiplying 10 by anything else because you just have 10 written 1 time. And now they want these numbers in order from least to greatest. So the smallest number would be 1, followed by 8, then 9, 10, and 16. But of course, those are not in our answer choices because the numbers are written as they originally were. So now I'm going to go back and write them the way they were written to begin with. 1 was 6 to the 0. 8 was 2 cubed. 9 was always 9. 10 was from 10 to the first. And 16 was 4 squared. And now we just need to find which answer choice has this as the answer. So of course we should be starting with 6 to the 0, so that takes it down to either B or D. But then the next should be 2 cubed, which is not the case for B, so our answer is D. If A equals -6 and B equals 7, then 4A times the quantity 3B plus 5 plus 2B equals, if we want to find the value of this expression, then the first thing we need to do is substitute -6 and 7 for A and B respectively. So 4, this is actually 4 times A. Anytime you see a number and a letter written next to each other like this, that's multiplication. So I know that when I replace A with a -6, it's going to read 4 times -6. And you can use a little dot for a time sign, or you can even use the X for the time sign. But I'm just going to use parentheses. And then these parentheses here, since there's no sign between the A and the parentheses, not a plus sign, not a minus sign, or a division sign, again, it's understood to be multiplication. So this is times the quantity, 3, again, times B. B is 7, plus 5, plus 2, again, times B, which is 7. Now there are a lot of parentheses here. So what we can do to kind of minimize confusion is we can change these parentheses into brackets. And it still means the same thing. They act exactly like parentheses do. But sometimes it makes it look a little less confusing if you don't have all those parentheses everywhere. So in order to simplify this expression, we have to follow the order of operations, sometimes referred to as PEMDAS. I'm going to write that over here just so we have it to refer to, which is that we first always must simplify inside our parentheses first. Then we would simplify any terms with exponents next, followed by simplifying our multiplication and division operations from left to right in our expression. So just whichever one occurs first in our expression from left to right. And finally, we would simplify our addition and subtraction operations, also from left to right. So following PEMDAS, we first need to simplify these expressions inside our grouping symbols. So I'll bring down my 4 times negative 6. And then inside my grouping symbols, I also have to follow the order of operations. So now looking inside these grouping symbols, I have 2 different operations. I have multiplication, 3 times 7, and addition, plus 5. So if we refer back to PEMDAS, we need to do our multiplication before we do our addition. So I'm going to start by multiplying 3 times 7, which is 21. And I'll bring down plus 5 plus 2 times 7. We haven't finished simplifying inside our parentheses, or grouping symbols. So we must continue simplifying inside our grouping symbols until we're done. So that means the next thing I'm going to do is simplify 21 plus 5. So I have 4 times negative 6 times the quantity 26. And I can now just use parentheses again because I'm just multiplying times another number, plus 2 times 7. So we finished with the parentheses, which really, I know it looks like we haven't, but what this parentheses, what that P actually means, is not just parentheses. Any parentheses you do, simplify them. No. Doesn't mean that. It means any parentheses that act as grouping symbols. So parentheses that group more than one term together. And if you'll look at our parentheses, none of the ones we have up here are grouping more than one term together. Each set of parentheses just has a term in it because it's really acting as a multiplication sign, not as a grouping symbol in this case. So the only operations we have left are multiplication, 4 times negative 6 times 26, and addition. And again, according to PEMDAS, we need to do that multiplication before we get to addition. And we work multiplication division simply from left to right. So I'll first multiply 4 times negative 6, which is negative 24. Positive times a negative is a negative, times 26 plus 2 times 7. So we want to continue working our multiplication from left to right until we've simplified all multiplication, which means I need to multiply negative 24 times 26 next. I'm going to do that just right here to the side. 26 times 24. 4 times 6 is 24, so you write the 4 and carry the 2. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 2 is 10. And then we use a 0 placeholder so we can move on to the 2. 2 times 6 is 12, write the 2, carry the 1. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. 4 plus 0 is 4, 0 plus 2 is 2, 1 plus 5 is 6. 624, and that's after we added. But it was a positive 26 times a negative 24, which means it's a negative 624 plus 2 times 7. We're almost there. We need to continue with our multiplication until we've multiplied all the terms there are to multiply, which means we next need to multiply our 2 times 7. So we have negative 624 plus 2 times 7 is 14. Now we finally simplified it down to our very last operation, and that is addition. And we're adding two numbers with different signs. One's negative, one's positive. When you're adding numbers with different signs, you need to subtract the numbers and take the sign of the number with the larger absolute value. So 624 minus 14 is 610. And since 624 is negative, our answer is negative. So your answer is D, negative 610. In the figure, segment BC is 4 units long, segment CD is 8 units long, and segment DE is 6 units long. What is the length of segment AC? The first thing I'd like to do is take this information and actually put it on my picture. So segment BC is 4 units long. Here's segment BC, it's 4. Segment CD is 8 units long. CD is 8. And segment DE is 6 units long. DE is 6 units long. These triangles are not congruent, and that's obvious. If you're looking at them, you can see this triangle is smaller than the other one. However, these right angles are congruent. These vertical angles are congruent. And since 2 angles of this triangle are congruent to 2 angles of the other triangle, that means that the third angles, angle E and angle A, are congruent to each other. Therefore, these 2 triangles are similar to each other because all 3 of their corresponding angles are congruent to each other. And since these triangles are similar, that means that their corresponding sides are proportional. You see that segment BC is half of segment CD. 4 is half of 8. So if we can find the length of segment CE, then we know the length of segment AC is half of that. We're going to find the length of segment CE using the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. We have our 2 legs. 8 squared plus 6 squared equals C squared. 8 squared is 64 plus 6 squared is 36 equals C squared. 64 plus 36 is 100 equals C squared. Then to solve for C, we need to square root both sides. The square root of 100 is 10, and the square root of C squared is C. So the length of segment CE is 10. And again, the lengths of the sides of triangle ABC are half the corresponding sides of triangle CDE. So since the length of segment CE is 10, that means that the length of segment AC is half of that, or 5. So answer B. Jesse invests $7,000 in a certificate of deposit that pays interest at the rate of 7.5% annually. How much interest in dollars does Jesse gain from this investment during the first year that he holds the certificate? This is a great problem to use this formula on. And some people call it IPERT, just as a way to remember it. The I stands for the interest, the amount of interest in dollars, like what we're trying to find. P stands for principal, or the amount that's being invested initially. That would be our $7,000. The R is the rate, or the percentage, but written as a decimal. So we're going to take 7.5% and write it as a decimal. And that'll be our rate. And then T stands for time. So you may want to make a note of that. This I is the interest. P is the principal. R is the rate as a decimal. And the T is the time. So we're going to take our information from our problem and plug it in. So our amount of interest is equal to the principal, $7,000, times the rate as a decimal again. So we're taking 7.5% and changing it to a decimal, which means taking the decimal and moving it 2 places to the left. So you add that 0, so it's 75 thousandths, and then times the year, or the time, and we're just trying to find out about the first year. So that means it's been in there for 1 year, and then we just need to multiply those things together. So 1 times anything is just that, so I can really kind of ignore that. So I just need to multiply these 2 numbers together. So I have this 75 thousandths, and I'm going to put it on top because it's very easy to multiply times 7,000, since the first thing I'm going to do is just write down those 3 zeros. And then the only number I really have to multiply by is the 7. So 7 times 5 is 35. Write the 5, carry the 3. 7 times 7 is 49, plus 3 is 52. And then we have 3 numbers behind the decimal, so 3 numbers behind the decimal. And that means that he's going to make $525 off of his investment. So that's the number you would need to bubble in, is 525. In a game of chance, 3 dice are cast simultaneously. What is the probability that all 3 will land with a 6 showing? Well, the probability of just 1 dice landing with a 6 showing is 1 out of 6. Since one of the numbers is a 6 out of a total of 6 numbers. And the other 2 dice have the same probability. So times 1/6 times 1/6. All of these events are independent of each other, meaning they don't affect each other, which is why we just multiply the 3 probabilities of the 3 dice together. So that means that the probability is 1 out of 6 times 6 is 36, times 6 is 216. So 1 in 216. Which, if you really think about it, makes a lot of sense. It's not very likely that when you roll 3 dice, you're going to get 3 6s. It's very unlikely. It doesn't happen very often. Maybe 1 time out of 216 times that you cast those dice. Francine can ride 16 miles on her bicycle in 45 minutes. At this speed, how many minutes would it take Francine to ride 60 miles? This problem is a good candidate for using a proportion to solve. There's more than one way to solve it, but I like proportion, so I'm going to use a proportion. First, I know that Francine can go 16 miles in 45 minutes. That's going to be my first ratio. So I have 16 miles in 45 minutes. And the key to setting up a successful proportion is to be consistent. So since our first ratio, we have miles to minutes, then our second ratio will also be miles to minutes. So they want to know how many minutes it would take Francine to ride 60 miles. So my miles is 60, and my minutes is what I'm trying to find, so that's where I'll put a variable. To solve a proportion, we cross multiply. 16 times x is 16x, and that equals 60 times 45, 0. 6 times 5 is 30, carry the 3. 6 times 4 is 24, plus 3 is 27. So 2,700. And then we solve for x by dividing both sides by 16. So x equals, and now I need to find out what 2,700 divided by 16 is. 16 goes into 2,700 one time. And that's 16, and we subtract and get 11. Then we bring down our 0. We could use 15 as a compatible number to see how many times 15 would go into 110. So we have 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, 90, 105. So 7 times. So let's see if 16 will go into 110 7 times. 7 times 6 is 42. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 4 is 11. And that's a little too big, which means I know 16 goes into 110 6 times. So 16 times 6. 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 3 is 9. And that works. So we need to subtract, and we get 14. Then we bring down our next 0. So we have 140. So I know 16 is going to go into 140 at least 7 times, but it should go even more than that. So let's see what 16 times 8 is. 8 times 6 is 48. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 4 is 12. And that's all we're going to be able to do. So 8 times, and we get 128. And when we subtract those numbers, we get 12. So that means we need to add a decimal and a 0 and bring it down. 16 goes into 120 7 times. 16 times 7 we found earlier is 112. So we subtract and we get 8. We add another 0 and bring it down. And 16 goes into 80 less than 6 times, and actually exactly 5 times. 16 times 5 is 80. So we subtract and we get a remainder of 0. So that means if it took her 45 minutes to go 16 miles, it should take her 168 7/75 minutes to go 60 miles. And this is the answer you would grid in. The table shows the cost of renting a bicycle for 1, 2, or 3 hours. Which of the following equations best represents the data? If C represents the cost and h represents the time of rental. Since this is a multiple choice question, you could always substitute these values or substitute these values for hours into your equation and see if you get the cost. For instance, you could replace h with 1, and you have $3.60 or $3.60 times 1, which is $3.60, which is the cost for 1 hour. And then do the same with 2 and with 3. Because sometimes an equation will work for one set of data, but not for the other two. So you should test it on all of them. However, I'll show you how to solve this problem if it weren't multiple choice. So we're going to write our own function rule using the data. First, looking at hours and cost, your cost is dependent on the number of hours you rent the bike. Cost then is the dependent variable. And I want to focus on my dependent variable and see what kind of changes are happening. So from $3.60 to $7.20, I'm adding $3.60. From $7.20 to $10.80, I'm again adding $3.60. So I can see that the change in y is constant, or the change in the cost in the dependent variable is constant. I want to now compare and see what's happening with my independent variable, my time. So from 1 to 2, I increase by 1. From 2 to 3, I also increase by 1. So there's a constant change in my independent, my time, as well. This tells me that there's a linear relationship here. So to write my function rule, I simply need to find my rate of change, which is the change in y divided by the change in x. And the y, that's the dependent variable, whereas x is the independent variable. And we've already established that our cost is dependent, therefore our cost is our y. And we've already found the change in y, it's $3.60. Divided by the change in x, 1. So our rate of change is simply $3.60. And that rate of change is what you're multiplying the independent variable by to get the dependent variable. So I've now found that the cost is equal to $3.60 times my independent variable of h. And then we can check and see if it works. So let's replace h with 1. $3.60 times 1 is $3.60. Try it with 2. $3.60 times 2 is $7.20. Finally, 3. $3.60 times 3 is $10.80. So that verifies that our function rule works for this situation and is correct. So answer A. Which of the following could be a graph of the function y equals 1 divided by x? Let's start with B. This is a linear function. In fact, it even looks like the parent function of a linear function, which is y equals x. So not y equals 1 divided by x. By the way, this is called a rational function. The root ratio means a comparison of two numbers, or a fraction, and b is not the graph of a rational function. It's the graph of a linear function. C is a quadratic function graph. This parabola is graphed from a quadratic function. And this also looks like the parent form. The parent form of a quadratic function is y equals x squared. So this would also not be the graph of a rational function. On D, this is what an exponential function looks like. It starts out increasing slowly, but then it begins increasing faster. And that parent function is y equals a number to the x value, or b to the x. That's not the parent function, that's just the form. And it's actually y equals a times b to the x. But again, not a rational function. And then, so we can eliminate D. And then on E, this is very similar to B. It's another linear function. It graphs a line. And it's not the parent function this time, but it's still a linear function. So it's in this form, y equals mx plus b. So still, with a linear function, our x is not in the denominator like our rational function. So that one's out as well. Which means we're left with A, which is the graph of a rational function. Something you can think about with rational functions is that the only number you can't divide by is 0. Notice how on this graph, your domain is never 0. On this side of our graph, it's approaching 0 and then it turns down sharply away from 0 because your x value can never be 0 since you cannot divide by 0. It's the same thing in the first quadrant. Again, it's approaching 0 and then it turns sharply away from 0 because x can never be 0. Your y value will also never be 0. So again, you can tell in this graph our y value never reaches 0. However, in all of these other graphs, we do have an x value of 0. There it is, right there. Right there, our x value of 0. And so that's another way to tell that A is the solution. A is the graph of the function y equals 1 divided by x.